Well, hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Frank Sesno, and you are seeing four other amazing people who are part of the Planet Forward project. There are Planet Forward FAO fellows, and welcome to Studio 1A. This is my study. If you were here, I'd serve fresh squeezed lemonade or something like that, but you're not, so you don't get the lemonade. I'm sorry we're not all together, but we'll be there soon. We are here today to talk to, engage, and hear from four remarkable folks who have been working with us all summer long on stories related to food and to agriculture and sustainable agriculture. At Planet Forward, we talk about how we move the planet forward, and they've been doing that. So why don't we say hi to everybody? Our calling here is how can we end global hunger sustainably? So I hope you're all going to have the answers here. Let's start with Sajal Govindaro. Sajal, how you doing?
Doing well, Frank, thank you.
Good, and you're joining us from the Planet Forward spacious offices on the campus of the George Washington University. Terius Harris, how you doing?
Hey Frank, doing pretty good. How are you today?
Good, and where are you?
Currently in Chattanooga.
Chattanooga, Tennessee, but en route to Washington, sources tell me.
En route to Washington, that is correct.
Good, this is good. Benjamin Thomas, how you doing?
Doing well, Frank.
And where are you?
For the webinar.
Yeah. Where are you, Benjamin?
I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania at Franklin and Marshall College.
Franklin and Marshall College. We should give everybody's college's affiliation. Sajal is at GW. Terius, which school do you want to give credit to?
University of Oklahoma.
University of Oklahoma, but your stories come from a place called Hawaii. And Jules Struck. Hey, Jules.
Hi.
And Jules, where are you coming to us from now?
I'm in Revere, Massachusetts.
Revere, Massachusetts. And your school?
I just graduated from Emerson College in Boston.
Awesome. Well, let me give a little bit of background so that everybody knows. I'm Frank Sesno. I started Planet Forward some time ago. Planet Forward, as I say, is this platform where we have people from all over the country, all over the world, posting stories about food, water, energy, built environment, biodiversity, public health, and the ideas, the inventions, the innovations that can move the planet forward. Lots of problems, lots of challenges, lots of issues, but also some really amazing people doing incredible work and capturing those narratives, telling those stories. It informs us, it inspires us, and it helps us connect with others who can do similar kinds of things in their communities, again, to move the planet forward. What I want to do here, and here's how it'll work, is we're going to go to each of our Planet Forward fellows, and I'll talk about what makes a fellow in just a moment. And we're going to let them talk to you a little bit about the story or a story they did. All worked with Planet Forward this summer. This is a program that is made possible by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. We've been working with FAO for several years now. It's a fabulous partnership, an amazing group of people who are dedicated to putting all of their knowledge and all of their work and heft behind this effort to end hunger on what is still, unfortunately, a very hungry planet. And our FAO fellows, the four students here, applied for this wonderful opportunity and then had an opportunity to work with us to consult with FAO as they pulled their stories together. So I'm going to let everybody take a couple minutes and tell you about one of their stories and a bit of that. We'll open this up to conversation, and then we very much want your questions, the audience. If you're out there, punch in a question. If you use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen, that would be really helpful. And I'll see that, and I'll pass those questions on to everybody. What we really want to hear about is why you're interested in this issue of hunger, what you looked at in your particular story, and how you put your story together. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite each of you to spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about the following 3 very simple things. Okay, 1, a little bit about your story. What is it? And, brief description. Why did you do it? What drew you to it? And then I'm going to ask you each to do 1 superlative about your story, the most interesting, shocking, most surprising, most upsetting, most inspiring. You choose the superlative, and then we'll go from there. So let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Jules, why don't you start us off?
All right. So I did a series of stories on young sustainable farmers and the biggest challenges that they face in breaking into an industry that's dominated by big ag. This was an important series to me because we all eat food, and I think that sometimes it can feel like we're participating in a food system that is polluting the environment or somehow, not making the world a more sustainable place. And so what was great about doing this series of stories was that I got to talk to farmers who are experimenting with and succeeding with different ways forward and different ways to grow food that we can then buy and support. And in that way, we can, make the world a better place, not to sound Pollyanna-ish. But what was most striking to me about doing these stories was that these farmers from all different backgrounds are really quite excited about figuring out ways to farm more sustainably. I think sometimes that we consider farmers to be somewhat complacent in a system that is not very sustainable, but in fact, there are so many people out there who are trying to make farming better, and they're really, really excited about it. And they want people to know that they're working hard to create a food system that is more sustainable. So
I see one of those farmers from one of your stories.
So this is Steve Mcarthur. He's not actually a farmer, but he was involved in buying he's involved in one of the farms down the street. So I can talk about that a little bit more.
Talk
later.
about that. I think you referred to him as a hippie in your, or he did.
He referred to himself as a hippie.
And maybe we see why. All right, what's your superlative?
Striking. I think what was striking, as I said, was just that farmers are so excited about finding new ways to be sustainable and to share that with other farmers in the community. Sure. So that was really cool.
All right, more soon. Terry Harris, you're up.
Thank you so much, Frank. So I had the privilege of covering the revitalization of fish ponds in Hawaii. And so there's, over the past few centuries, fish ponds have declined in Hawaii due to colonization. However, there are a few organizations that are working towards revitalizing those fish ponds, which is a Native Hawaiian traditional practice, and reconnecting Native Hawaiians with that practice through storytelling or mo'olelo. It was a wonderful opportunity, and it was very important for me just because of my own indigeneity. I think it's really important that we uplift Indigenous voices and share those cultural practices and reconnect and help other Native people understand that your voices matter as well and your practices matter, and that it's important to reconnect with your own lineage and traditional practices.
So I'm going to just jump in here because we put your story up there. The return of, say it.
Loko'ea.
What is that?
Loko'ea is the fish pond here. This is the specific one in North Shore of Oahu. This is where I cover most of my stories. So the Loko'ea Malama Foundation, they revitalize this land that was once owned by Kamehameha schools. And they started this through a simple volunteer workday opportunity. And now it's become this amazing nonprofit that's revitalizing the land, and not only revitalizing it, but also supplying food and fish to the local community in times of need, such as during COVID, where they supplied through a food truck. They gave, with COVID restrictions in mind, they supplied food to the surrounding community that was already impacted greatly by COVID. And this is just one of the beautiful photos of the space.
Did you take that photo?
I did take this one. It was a great day to be there.
And that's a real rainbow we're seeing there? You didn't Photoshop
a real rainbow. In case you didn't know, Hawaii is the rainbow state. Everywhere you go, you can't help but to find one.
That's right. Are you from Hawaii?
No, I'm actually from Alaska.
From Alaska. I want to point that out to everybody. Okay, why do you care, and what's your superlative?
I care just because the Indigenous voices, Indigenous practice are good to highlight and help others realize that you should reconnect with your traditional practices and culture. And I would say the superlative, or the most shocking part, was to know that once in Hawaiian history, there was a time that these fish ponds actually provided sustenance for the entire island. And that was an amazing thing to learn, and just understanding that there are still so many fish ponds on the islands that are still that still need to be revitalized, that are still not in use, that is still lacking those volunteers and that help to revitalize the area. It shows the potential that it can have versus like commercial fisheries and things of the sort.
Okay, more soon. Sajal, over to you.
Yeah, so my story really contextualizes food insecurity during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we've never seen a public health crisis of this magnitude before. And as a result, it has left people drastically more food insecure. And so this prompted a response like none we had ever seen before, and the development of really creative solutions by local communities and governments to combat food insecurity. The issue with some of these solutions were that they only existed in the short term, still leaving people food insecure. And so the question that my piece really attempts to answer is, how can we turn some of these really creative short-term COVID response mechanisms and programs regarding food insecurity into long-term equitable solutions? And this matters to me, especially because it's important for communities of color who are disproportionately impacted. They've been dealing with issues of food insecurity before the pandemic and will be after if legislators don't use this as a quintessential turning point.
And how about your superlative? What was the most of whatever, fill in the blank, in your working on these stories, putting this together?
Yeah, so I think the superlative would definitely be the most inspiring. The most inspiring thing to me was just seeing how many people in local communities, through interviews and talking to them, swiftly got behind this mass effort to make sure that people had food in their hands. And I was able to go down to the San Francisco Marin Food Bank and talk to people. And this was an especially important experience for me in my career too, because so I graduated high school last year. Like all of my journalistic experience has been during college, which means online and virtual. So this was the first time I could interview people in person too. And it just kind of reinvigorated this sense of why I love, doing this job and want to go into this career. And it was really amazing getting to talk to people and learn about their perspectives.
Who are we seeing here?
This is George Kwong. He's 63 years old. He's one of the supervisors at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. I had talked to him, and he had gotten furloughed, I think in March of 2020, from his job as a hotel kitchen supervisor. But he talked to me about how his passion in life is food and making people happy through food. And so he was inspired to work at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, and he started volunteering. And then started kind of, as in his own words, climbing the ladder and became one of the supervisors there.
Great. All right. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to open this up to a conversation with all of you here for a few minutes. And I want to again suggest to our audience that if you got a question, put it in the Q&A, and I'm going to put that to the students, to our fellows. Let me start by asking each of you, why food? Okay. I mean, the FAO, as I mentioned, is committed to ending hunger. We're talking, how can we end hunger sustainably? You're all very interested in food at one level or another. And I'm just interested, what is it that you're particularly focused on? Who wants to start? Just jump in. Don't all jump at once though. Benjamin, go ahead. You start us off on this round.
Yeah, so I did my story on agriculture and farming, like Jules. And so why I chose to write about agriculture was because in the spring semester, I had spent like 3 months on a farm. And that was a really good experience. I highly recommend it to like everybody who's about my age, college students. It's definitely an experience worth doing. At the same time, while it was super exciting, I had my doubts about how effective it was, as it was just like a small 57-acre farm, and it was trying to be regenerative, and it was doing exciting agricultural things, but I wasn't entirely sure that it was going to be an effective way at getting food to people. So what I did was I decided to do some research into the different streams of sustainable agriculture and figure out, okay, how are other people doing this? And what are the strengths and the shortcomings of different ways of doing agriculture? And so what I found was that there were generally two major streams of agriculture. And so the one was the industry way of doing sustainable agriculture. And its major drawback tended to be that the industry tends to be profit oriented, and that
Right.
means that sustainable practices can take a back seat. On the flip side, sustainable agriculture, you will often see smaller farmers or other young farmers doing this, like Jules was talking about. And while they have the values and they want to do sustainable agriculture, they may lack the business sense and the logistics to actually be very effective in getting food to the people who need it.
Right. So we've got your story up here. So as I asked everybody else, and I apologize for not following up right up with you on this, summarize your story. Why does this matter to you? And what was your superlative around this?
Yes. So my story was about 3 different farms. One was one of those industry farms I talked about.
Yep.
One was a famous sustainable agriculture farm, the farm of Joe Salatin. And then the third farm was with this guy, Chris Newman. And he's a Black and Indigenous farmer in Virginia. And what he's trying to do is to merge the best of both worlds. So the efficiency of industry and the values of more newcomers to the field who want to do sustainable agriculture. And so what I found super surprising and encouraging about this story, I'll give you 2 superlatives, was that while in the US, we see that organics and sustainable agriculture hasn't really taken off too much, like it still comprises a fairly small percentage of the food market. In other countries that have taken some legislative steps to shore up their organic standards, we see much more domination of the market by sustainably produced food. So the example I looked at was Denmark, where like 30 to 50% of some of the basic goods like eggs and bread and milk, those are produced from organic farms.
Great. Let me come back, Sajal, to you. Why food? Is this something that you're focused on?
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of as I mentioned, it has during the COVID-19 pandemic, because that's a lot of what my piece focuses on, contextualizes food insecurity, especially for communities of color. And so kind of through talking to different experts and interviews, Professor Raja, who I talked to, discussed how this was an issue that communities of color were facing far before the pandemic and could potentially be after. And so I think that learning different mechanisms of how to prevent food insecurity is something I'm really passionate about, especially with the intersection of policy. And she talked about something regarding like food equity advisors and how we can bring people of color into the conversation and how that overlaps with policy.
Tarius, how about you? Why food?
I think the real question is why not food? If we think about it on an everyday basis, food is what sustains us, water is what sustains us. So those things are very important topics that affect us in ways that we don't even know. I know that I never knew the importance of like agriculture and botany in regards to medicine and how food and herbs can not only heal you and not only sustain you as a person, but also heal you through their properties. And I just think that's very important. This specific topic came about when I was doing a volunteer day at Lokoya. And I just realized the amazing work that they were doing. And this revitalization is something that is growing around the world, especially for Indigenous communities. And I just believe that Indigenous communities and voices need to be uplifted in the work that they are doing. And I just think that it's absolutely amazing. For example, McCool was a really amazing person to be able to meet at Lokoya. And I learned so much more than I thought that I ever would. And on the volunteer day, I know I learned a lot about the space and place, which is very important. But also just having that opportunity to sit down with him and Seo to have that conversation about not only the work that they are doing, but how it is actually impacting and making a positive change in the community. I think those are stories that need to be uplifted. And luckily, I think that the cool thing that I also learned is that food is not only vegetables and fruit that we think it is. Because I didn't even realize or take into consideration the entire field of aquaculture, which is exactly what they focus on. And learning about how you do that sustainably through traditional practices was a really amazing opportunity that I thought that I should share with everyone else.
Jules, you have several stories that you posted, and they're obviously all about food. But I want to just read. I just want to read from one of them. You write, The farmland under Hannah Breckbill's feet could make her lots of money, but she's not going to let it. Who's Hannah Breckbill? And what's wrong with her? Why doesn't she want to let her farm make her money?
So Hannah Breckbill is this woman. She's a farmer in Decorah, Iowa, and she is one of the owners of a cooperative-owned farm that was purchased by the neighborhood as an LLC because basically this farmland in Decorah, Iowa went up for sale. And there was some question as to whether it would be sold to a hog confinement factory, which would pollute the land around it. And basically the community, which is a really interesting community, it's a lot of back to the landers who just happen to end up here for a variety of kind of serendipitous reasons, I suppose. So this community said, no, we don't want a hog confinement factory on our land. We're going to buy it as a group and then decide what to do with it. And Hannah, who was one of the owners of one of the shares, said, oh, I'd like to start an organic vegetable farm. But she kind of took that a step further and said, I don't want to own it as an individual. I would like to own it as a cooperative. And in that way, it can be passed on for generations to different sustainable farmers who don't necessarily come from the same family. So a lot of farmers get their land from in a generational model. So their parents will own it. And that has kind of made it hard for people whose parents don't own farms to buy land at a cheap price because they're competing with big ag, basically, which has tons of money. So she created, or she's a part of this really interesting LLC model, and is going to sell her shares when she retires for the price that she bought them at, plus how much she's accrued, or how much the business has accrued, but not how much the land has grown in value, which increases every year.
You quote her as saying she wants to see this passed down from one generation. You have another story, and the headline is "Word of Mouth Still Means a Lot, How Sustainability Spreads." I find this story so interesting, Jules, and you're very good, by the way, at writing these really grabby first lines to the story. Very well written, very engaging. And here's what you write out of Drake County, Ohio. Something unusual was going on in Nathan Brown's neighbor's field. What's this story about?
Yeah, so this was a really cool story because these farmers that I talked to are they take up the space that seems like conventional farming. They're mid-level farms in Ohio, and they're growing basically like corn and wheat, which are the two big crops in Ohio. But these guys that I spoke to are also experimenting with cover crops. They're experimenting with a lot of different like little sustainability practices that they can incorporate onto little plots in their farm. So for example, one of the farmers has like a moving chicken coop that he can keep his chickens in, but move it around so that they're fertilizing separate parts of the farm every season or how often he moves it. And what they were saying is that in these communities where conventional farming has been historically what the biggest types of practices, it's really important for farmers to just talk to each other about what they're trying to do. So the guy on Nathan Brown's, his neighbor was trying cover crops. He was trying cereal rye, and it worked really well for him. And that's how Nathan Brown figured out that he wanted to try it too, is because he just chatted with his neighbor and said, oh, like, is this working for you? And the guy said, yeah, it's actually great. I'm making money, and it takes a while, but reaping the rewards from that practice. So really, it's super important, is what they were trying to say, is that the community of farmers talks to each other. It's not just like scientists or legislators can create an initiative or come up with a new sustainability measure and just hand it out to farmers. Farmers have to be involved in that process.
Why we call it grassroots, right? It's grassroots. Yeah. One of the things I want to shout out, Jules, that you did throughout your stories is you have this wide lens segment that you come back to. It's periodically through, and you're taking a look at some of the global conditions that farmers confront, or that farmers, for example, you point out a third of the globe lives in urban areas. You quote a UN Habitat 2020 report, with that predicted to grow to 39% by 2035. But you point out that global demand for food is going to increase 70% by 2050. So more urbanization and yet more demand. Benjamin, let me come over to you to talk some more about your story. Your story is, as you point out, 3 different farms, 3 different farmers, and you're the headline, the new big ag, what regenerative agriculture can learn from conventional farming. And you've got Chris Newman is one of your characters. Joe Salatin is another one. Talk about Joe Salatin of Polyface Farm. You say he's one of America's most famous farmers. Who is this guy?
Yes, so Joe Salatin is one of the figureheads of the regenerative farming movement. Now, regenerative farming is a little bit different from organic farming. That was another thing I learned as I was doing this process, that the organic label is very specific, and it requires a decent amount of money to actually get the US government to certify you. And so a lot of people who are going into sustainable farming choose not to do organics, but to do this other regenerative farming sort of thing.
And what is regenerative farming? Just define that for everybody.
Yes, so regenerative farming is farming in a way that is not only sustainable, so like you can keep this thing going, but it's actively trying to improve the environment. So one way that Joe Salatin does this, and Chris Newman does this as well, is through agroforestry. And so the idea here is that you are growing trees which will provide food both for people, and then some trees which will provide food for animals as well. So then you let your pigs, for instance, run in this silver pasture, which is pasture which has these fruit trees in it. And the pigs are able to forage from the ground and forage from what comes from the trees. And then meanwhile, you are utilizing the upper space to both produce food for people, and then also to capture carbon out of the atmosphere and be put into the trees.
Okay, so now I'm quite positive that those are not pigs that I'm seeing there. Those look like cows to me. What are they doing?
So this is a very similar thing. You've correctly identified those as cows. And so pigs are not the only things that you can put in silver pasture. When I was back on the farm, we also did this with sheep. And while on my farm, we weren't doing this with cattle, here you can clearly see that there are some cattle feeding in silver pasture.
What is the connection that you drew, and you did this in your story as well, with a very nice sidebar column, to what we're seeing globally?
Right. So on the global stage, organics looks very different. So while the US has its own specific organic standard, there is no global or universal standard that everybody ascribes to when they talk about what is organic and what is not. And one of the things that Denmark, which was the case study country I looked at, does better than the US is that while in the US, you have to pay to get certified, and you have to be organic for 3 years before you get the actual label. In Denmark, the government tries to make it as easy as possible for farmers to switch over to organic. So they do this by subsidizing the cost of the organic inspection and labeling process. So you don't have to pay a cent for that. And in addition to this, the government has partnered with big agricultural farms and said, hey, look, if you actually switch to organic, you're going to be helping your own bottom line, because we will point out to you market research that shows that you can be making more money if you switch to organic.
What do you take away from your story? What do you want your audience to take away from your story? Because you're looking at 3 different kinds of farming, and we have to be realistic here. We have maybe 800 million people on the planet who are hungry, food insecure. We know that hunger in America, as much as we would like to pretend doesn't exist, it does. We know that food deserts are a terrible problem, both in urban settings and in rural America. And many people say, well, you know, we should everything should be organic. And others say, well, you do that, you're not going to feed all these people, that you've got to have the economies of scale. So how do you come away from this comparison that you're making in terms of what you think, what you've concluded the planet needs to feed all the people who are currently spinning around the sun?
Yeah, so here I think that it may be a false dilemma. So part of it is that as conventional agriculture stands, we are not going to be able to produce food for people long term. As the climate changes, traditional ways, or at least traditional since the 1950s and mechanization, traditional ways of doing agriculture are not going to be able to provide food for people because they are super water intensive, they are super fertilizer intensive, and they destroy the soils. And so it's a short-term strategy for high yield. So herein lies the opportunity for sustainable farming, where if we practice a kind of farming that increases our soil health, increases our ability to be resilient to climate change, then we are going to be able to weather what's coming ahead in the future.
And sustainable agriculture doesn't preclude large-scale agriculture.
Yes, so that is
a 5,000 acre spread, but if you're using covered crops, no-till, and various other methods, you're going to preserve that topsoil and the other elements that we need, right?
Yeah, and that's the I think the point of what Chris Newman is doing, because he sees that there are people who are trying to change the face of agriculture, but right now, like, organic food sales only account for a couple % of the total food sales in the US. And so if we want to change what agriculture looks like on a systemic level, then we have to embrace the efficiencies of scale. And so Chris Newman is trying to do that. He's trying to create a food system which is not only about farming, but is also about distribution. And so here is, were you going to ask something?
No, go ahead quickly, and
Okay.
then we'll go on to Sajal.
So here is something that I think Chris Newman brings uniquely to the table, because he has a very different background than a lot of people who are going into sustainable farming today. To get into farming, you have to buy land, and land is expensive. So people who are coming into farming new, who want to implement new ideas, they tend to be very rich people. They also tend to be white people. And so as a result, since there's just such an overabundance of this segment of the population, there are certain blind spots in the way that sustainable agriculture is done. And Chris, who comes out of a poor upbringing and comes out of the inner city, he knows what the needs of the poor are, what the needs of people who can't afford like $10 ground beef are $6 for a dozen eggs. He knows what their needs are. And as a result, he's working towards a food system that can serve everybody.
That's terrific. That's terrific. All right, Sajal, your story is headlined, COVID prompted local communities to creatively combat food insecurity. Are structural solutions next? I love that question. Are structural solutions next? And you talked to George Kwong, whom we saw a picture of. You spoke about him in a moment. But you also spoke about some of the volunteering he was doing with the San Francisco food bank there, and to help out his community. You also talk about a farm to family program. Really interested in that. So why don't you tell folks what some of these things in the farm to family program that you wrote about?
Yeah, so the Farm to Family program repurposed produce that would have been wasted on farms and brought them to food banks and put them in the hands of those who are food insecure. And so that was just one of the programs that were implemented and to a larger scale during the COVID pandemic to mitigate some of those food insecurity issues. There were a couple other programs too that were implemented. Those include some, especially in the Bay Area and like the San Francisco Bay Area. We had pop-up pantries and different food bank programs, meal delivery programs really ramped up to do home deliveries and things like that. So a lot of really creative initiatives that were prompted by the pandemic.
Why did you write about this? What was it that struck you as newsworthy or interesting or worthy of special attention? Haven't they been around and been doing this for a long time? I mean, what makes pop now?
I think even in initial conversations, I talked to Susie Smith, who is the one of the directors at the Human Services Agency at the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, at the San Francisco City Government, and she mentioned how this effort prompted such a large response. We've never seen something of this magnitude, and that's what really struck me, is because COVID prompted such a large response, and because of that, I think it exposed a lot of underlying issues that have been systemic for a really, really long time. And so in turn, I think it prompts this conversation of how we can reflect on things that were exacerbated during COVID and where we can go from there. And so the call to action in my piece is really looking at the next renegotiation of the Farm Bill, because that's a huge opportunity. 80% of the funds included in the Farm Bill are dedicated to federal nutrition programming alone. And so that's, like I said, a huge opportunity for substantial change to be able to make some of these food insecurity issues or these solutions to food insecurity issues long lasting.
Another one you cited is in Baltimore, I think, engage citizens. What was that?
Engaged citizens. Are you referring to the?
There's a resident food equity advisors group working
Yes,
there, and this whole effort to engage citizens in the process and really have connections and outreach.
Yeah, so that really ties into bringing people of color, especially Black and Latinx people of color, into the conversation, and having food equity advisors, working directly with city government to be able to provide recommendations on how the community can best benefit from, like nutritious and culturally appropriate food. And that helps food insecurity not only in the short term, but in the long term as well.
All right, Terius Harris, I want to come over to you because we've heard a couple of references to traditional food and all the rest, and that's what you were doing. And your story, The Return of Loko'ya, is that how we pronounce that? Did I get that right? I want to read your first paragraph, and I hope you'll all forgive me this, but I want to acknowledge your words, and because I think you've done such a great job with these, and they're very evocative. You write, for many organizations, COVID-19 meant doors closed. At Loko'ya, a sacred native Hawaiian fish pond on the northwest side of Oahu that is used for aquaculture and traditional practices, the pandemic opened an opportunity for community members to advance their efforts to reclaim the ancient Hawaiian land, culture, and traditions of sustainable aquaculture production while benefiting from it. What are they doing, Terius? What did you see and learn about that's actually going on there?
So I think it's no secret that COVID-19 had a huge impact on businesses and nonprofits and other organizations, and kept us away from each other a lot. And it's still continuing to have its own impacts. But the amazing thing about Loko'ya is that during the pandemic, obviously they had to shut down for some time due to COVID restrictions. However, when they were able to allow volunteers, they opened their doors immediately. So they allowed their volunteers to come and work with them. And they were able to come and volunteer. But I think the coolest thing about it is that during this time, obviously operations still continued in a way. They just weren't allowed to have volunteers. So they continued to run the fish pond as normal. And they realized that the local community was struggling a lot in regards to receiving or obtaining food, and maybe had financial issues in the area due to the impacts of COVID-19 once again. And so this was an amazing opportunity for them to utilize all this space that they have reclaimed and revitalized as a community to give back to the community. So what they had the opportunity to do was to take this fish and take their normal yield that they get and to provide food for the community at a food drive, which was a really cool thing to learn about. And from that, they had already been known in the community and people had already volunteered. But due to that specific instance, they have seen such an increase in their volunteer numbers, just because this community has now recognized them as an organization that is not only here and just, raising fish. It's something that can actually have an impact in the community and provide security for them in the area of food.
And how much food are they actually producing, Terius? I mean, are they pulling 2 fish from the pond, or are they legitimately feeding the entire community? Or is this going to be something that has to grow quite a bit before it's really going to be a significant contributor to people's diets.
It actually is already a significant contributor. If they're able to feed their own community, I know that they would love the opportunity of the goal. They have a goal to be able to feed the entire island. Not sure if that's possible, but I think that's also a really good important part to note is that they operate their fish pond sustainably. So what that means is they don't take more than the fish will give, or what local AO will give. So they don't try to force numbers. They don't try to create more fish or more produce within the fish pond. They allow whatever nature provides, and that's what they take from.
What do you think the world, could learn from this particular native culture, native practice?
I think that the world can learn this not only from Native Hawaiians, but all Indigenous communities, is that there's a certain respect to nature that should be given. It's not about profit. It's not about the capitalistic mindset. It's about forming a balance to take only what is needed, only what you need to have in order to sustain and survive. I think that because of the world that we live in, especially with these westernized ideologies, that we too, as a society, we focus too much on more and more and more. And if we continue to take and take, the planet won't have much more to give. And so I think that we should take a more sustainable and balanced approach in all ways of life, whether it be through fisheries or forestry or any other form of agricultural or environmental field.
May I hereby invite all of you to please run the planet. We need you. we need what you're saying to really resonate. Let me turn to a question from the audience now, and invite anybody else who's out watching and listening to this conversation. If you've got a question for one of the Planet Forward FAO fellows, or for all of them, to please put it in the Q&A function. I'm also going to call in Lisa Palmer in a couple of minutes. I want to introduce you to her. She is our National Geographic Professor of Science Communication at GW. She worked with all 4 of these wonderful students, sometimes with a whip, I think, to make sure things got done, mostly with carrots, and did a fabulous job getting over the finish line. And Akhti Mohammed is also with us. She's with FAO, and I'm going to ask her to join us for a couple of comments in a moment. But let's go to some questions now from people who are part of this discussion. This is from Philippa, for all of you. Now that you've produced, you've conducted your research and written your stories, on reflection, would you have changed anything about the process or improve any aspect if you were doing this all over again? And that thought may be daunting all by itself, doing this all over again. But what she asked is, would you do something different, or would you change anything? Jules, you go first.
Sure. I think that with journalism, frequently one challenge that journalists face is that you might often go report a story and you're only reporting it for a certain amount of time and you have a deadline. And so you can't really become entrenched in the history, and the negative term for this is parachute journalism, right? You just drop in, you think you understand the story, you write it really quickly, and then you leave. And that's unfortunate. And I think there's a lot of strategies that we have as journalists in order to make sure that we're getting the right story, even when we have a short deadline. But of course, I would love much more time. I would have loved much more time to just learn the history of the places that I was reporting on, the agricultural history specifically, and who the over the past couple hundred years.
Sure.
So just more time in each place would have been great. It's not always possible, but that would have been awesome.
Benjamin, how about you?
Echoing what Jules said a little bit, I think one of the intimidating things about journalism for me was that I still have a whole lot to learn about food and agriculture in general. I know some stuff, but there's so much more out there that I need to learn. And so it's scary to be writing stuff, because you want to write things that are true, and you don't want to write a picture that's too small or not wide enough or doesn't get the full picture. And so I don't know, it might have been helpful for me to try to expand even beyond the 3 farms I looked at and look at and maybe talk to other people, even if they don't make it into the story, just so that I can get a wider perspective of what's going on.
Yeah.
I think additionally, as I was talking to Chris Newman, he was a super intelligent guy, which I knew going in, but he sort of preempted all of the questions that I had. So I would ask him one question and I had some like follow-up questions written down, and he just answered like all of those as he was going along. So I think as I go into interviews next time, I might draw out like a diagram, a tree of where conversation could go if the person I'm interviewing answers certain questions, or if they answer other questions, just give myself a flow chart of how to conduct the interview.
Tarius, anything you could do differently or improve?
I think that for me, I maybe would have diversified my content a little bit. This was the first time that I guess, focused mainly on articles, which for one, as you already know, Frank, I really enjoy eco poetry. So not writing a piece for this was a little bit of a regret for me. But also I would say that while doing the interview and gathering the information, I think that it's really important to know for anyone. I would say take out your camera, not only voice record, but actually record. There were so many times that I was talking to Seo or Makua, and we were having a deep conversation, and it tied to multiple parts of the questions that I was going to ask. But sometimes it's not just about the words. So you can read these words in an article and very much understand them, but there's feeling behind those words. And I think that that's the part that was missing for me, which was just that I could still feel it through the article, but when I was there, I could feel it in my soul. And I think that's what I want people to have experienced more. And so in the future, I think that whether or not I'm going to use the video platform to present my information, I will still record so that I at least have that option.
That's really interesting. So Joel, how about you?
Yeah, kind of along the lines of what Jules and Tarius mentioned, I wish I had a little bit more time to produce like a multimedia aspect to this. I, also conducted a lot of the interviews, actually probably all of them, other than George Kwong's, virtually. And so I wish that I had more opportunities to go in person and really interact with people like Susie Smith or Professor Raja. Obviously, they're all over the country, but it would have been a great experience. So I look forward to future opportunities when I can conduct more interviews in person.
All right, let me spring this one on you, and I'm going to give you each a half of a beat to think about it before you have to speak, because then I'm going to invite some others. But I want to ask you one last round of questions before we bring Lisa and Akti on, and that is, if you could go anywhere around the world to do a food story, where would you go and why? What would you want to cover? It's been a very hard time to do that. This is COVID. This is, like I said, Studio 1A. I've barely been able to go out of the house, and our travel is constrained now. But one of the really wonderful things about storytelling and journalism and taking a camera someplace is you can take people, not just yourself, somewhere and really dive in and get to know people and the situation. So Tarius, I'll start with you this time. Where would you go around the world if you were to report a food or ag story, and why?
Actually, I have some thought into this. I would really love, and I know that Planet 4 has gone before, I would love to go to the Amazon. I think that it is very interesting to study areas, especially the tribes there, the Yanomamo and the Kayapo. I think that they can present some really interesting and amazing information on how more isolated tribes are able to provide and sustain themselves locally. That could really teach us some amazing practices that may be beneficial for larger scale farms or even agriculture in general. I think that would be really amazing.
That'd be awesome. And you're the right guy to go do that story. So I hope that happens. Jules, how about you? Where would you go and why?
I would go to a Purdue factory or some other big ag factory. I think it's really extremely unfortunate that big farming operations have worked so hard and in many cases successfully to keep information away from the public about what goes on in their factories. And so exposing that, I think, there are journalists who are working on that, and that's great. I think the more information that consumers have about where their food is coming from, the better. And yeah, those doors should be opened.
So Joel, where in the world would you go, and what story would you do and why?
I think I would want to expand on some of the stuff that I've already been reporting on. When I was talking to Professor Raja, we had a conversation about kind of like the global implications of some of the policy recommendations that she had, especially on a local level. And one of the things that she emphasized was that I think a common misconception, especially in Western communities, is that you try to make recommendations for other parts of the world when in reality, you really have to understand kind of how things work and how systems work in different parts of the world, and it can't just translate directly like that. And so I think in India, I think she mentioned in Kerala, there was a process similar to like the food equity advisors. And I would love to see how that kind of interacts with the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, and some of those solutions that they implemented during that.
Benjamin, where would your carbon footprint take you?
Well, I was going to say Brazil, but barring that, I think the Southwest US could be an interesting place to look at, because Southern California is one of the biggest breadbaskets of the nation, but as we're facing drought, that's going to come under pressure. But certain indigenous communities have been farming there for a long time without using super water intensive methods of agriculture. And so looking at their way of doing agriculture and what we can learn from them and what sorts of practices and crops we could be growing instead of what we currently are, I think that could be very informative.
Lisa Palmer, let me invite you up here for a moment. Lisa, as I say, is our National Geographic Professor of Science Communication. There's a lot of science in reporting on food and agriculture and sustainable agriculture. And there you are. Welcome and greetings and all that. You've been listening to this conversation. Can I take my hat off to you right now and tell you what a fabulous job you did with these students over the summer, and the work they've done makes us all really proud. What are your reflections from the experience and the work they've done?
Oh, thank you, Frank, for hosting this meeting. I'm so proud of the work. I'm just really deeply proud of the work of Benjamin and Jules and Sejal and Terius for not only tackling such important stories from around the country and reporting on them with such integrity, but also like thinking about how they did it on the challenges under which they reported these with putting in this work over the summer during COVID and under these especially tough circumstances. So I think it was just, for me, it was just such a pleasure to see such varied stories coming out of this project as well. And to see them really, struggle through the reporting process from idea to pitching and reporting, and then finally to publishing. And it's in that struggle where we learn, the most. And so I think that was really a rewarding part of it for me, to see you learn and grow in your stories, as well as, also feeling so proud of the reactions that your stories have been receiving so far. And I know that I'll continue to publish them, and I hope everybody here or promote them, on our social media. But you put a lens on some of these stories and ideas, not only inform us of some of the problems or some of the aspects that you've been seeing in your communities or where you've visited, and they've not only informed us, but they're also entertaining to read. And the visuals that you've taken for some of you, I think Terius and Sejal and Jules had great visuals that you took. It's sort of like it provided us with this sort of sense of some solution and hope to the storytelling that we'd like to have for some of the sustainability, just to think that there's that element as well, without pandering to us as a reader. So that was really important for me to see that with such stories reported with such integrity. And I think, I guess my final comment is that I know, as you know, or you may not know, that the selection of the Summer Storytelling Fellows, the FAO Planet Forward Fellows, is an intense process. And you were some of our top contributors as a result. And our contributors are really known for being the best and the brightest in their classes. So I really want to thank you and let you know how much we appreciate that.
Great, I'll second all of that. Let me, before we bring Aki in, I have another question from the floor, from the audience. Michaela asks, as journalists, your work are serving as bridges. Where would you like the conversations you have begun to go? What bridges would you like to connect in the community, policymakers, global discussions? Very quickly, let's just go around, you know, in a sentence or two. What bridges would you like to do? Sajal?
I would say the biggest takeaway, I think, in the US and beyond is to really invest in having conversations with local communities and kind of like Jules was talking about, this idea of kind of going away from parachute journalism and really investing in the conversation and staying there, because that's when we're really going to inform future initiatives and future policy, and how that can inform future decision making on a greater scale.
Darius, how about you? Where are the bridges you'd like to build?
I think the bridges I would like to build is conversations, much like Sajal, including more conversations, having conversations where we include more Indigenous communities. I think that we forget that agriculture not only impacts those, and it not only impacts those that are doing the farming and the agricultural work, but also those in the surrounding community. And I think that if we can find many practices and different methods in order to approach this through those Indigenous communities, that will be more respectful to the land and the surrounding community, and also more sustainable.
Jules, where would you like your journalism to build bridges?
I'd like to see a bridge between anyone who feels hopeless about climate change and this information, because I think all of these stories and a lot of other journalism provides a blueprint for ways that we can take action pretty immediately. And so just having that kind of those tools at your disposal really is motivating for a lot of people who feel hopeless. So,
Benjamin, bridge builder?
I would say two places. So one, I would love to see people who are going into the field of sustainability, of environmental science, of agriculture, partner up with people who are familiar with traditional agribusiness, not so that we can become the same thing, but so that we can take the best and make sustainable agriculture better and more efficient. So that's one. And the other is to bring voices from poorer communities, from marginalized communities, from inner city communities into the conversation, because agriculture is generally not a very urban topic. It sort of sits outside, but I think in order to have a sustainable food system, we need to be thinking about what happens to the food after it gets off the farm.
Those are great bridges to build. Akhti Mohammed, let me invite you up here if you can join us. Akhti is a communications officer with the FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. She's based here in Washington, but she comes to us live and in person from Ethiopia, which is where she is from. Akhti, it's been great to work with you and your colleagues at FAO throughout this process. And I'd like to, let you make any observations you make or ask any questions of the group. Thank you for all the support that you and FAO have offered and shared our way.
Thank you so much for giving me the platform, Frank. It's been an honor to partner with Planet Forward for the past 5 years to just engage with student storytellers. And this discussion has been so engaging and a small microcosm of the vast challenges that we face in food and agriculture. And all of the angles that the students have taken are so key to the discussions going on with the upcoming UN Food Systems Summit. A lot of people are kind of battling with these questions, and the students have taken such magnified some of these issues, from Sejal looking at the impact of COVID on food security and local response efforts and the food heroes on the ground, and Benjamin really asking some big questions of how do we make sustainable agriculture scalable, and having these conversations to bridge the gap between big agriculture and small scale, and what is a realistic future that can provide a food systems that can serve the community. And Jules looking at how young farmers can be more involved in agriculture. And for FAO, we're really interested in engaging youth and empowering youth to engage with agriculture. So your story is so inspiring. And Terius, I think the issue of understanding Indigenous food systems and the historical and political challenges they face and how they can be scaled up. So that Indigenous peoples and communities can be more self-sufficient is really important to the dialogue today. So this has been a fascinating conversation, and this is sort of like the result of what the partnership with Planet Forward allows us, is to tap into the incredible skills, storytelling capacities that students have to just to delve into these complex issues and provide really grassroots level landscape analysis. So we're really looking forward to promoting these stories and sharing them with colleagues around the world. So thank you so much, Frank, and congratulations everybody for the remarkable work you've done.
Well, thank you, Akti. Thank you for everything that you have done, and we will do together. And I'm going to close, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer this next question in 30 seconds or less. The question comes from Akti's colleague, Gabriel Lazier, who's also at FAO, and he asks a great question. You're all inspiring leaders in your own right. What should we do to inspire and create a generation of young people such as you, who are ready to take on the tough challenges facing our world in the next 30 years? This is your moment to, in 30 seconds, of course, pass on your wisdom. But seriously, though, I'm sure you've thought about this in one way or another. Sajal, why don't you go first?
I think the biggest thing is to promote conversations, having conversations, and embedding that into just daily life with, friends, going out, anything like that. Having conversations about really important topics, and then that allowing that to prompt involvement and things like that will really get it started.
Jules?
Yeah, I totally agree with Sejal. I think just making environmentalism and sustainability fun and exciting, and promoting ways that we can do that really easily in our everyday lives is important.
Benjamin?
I think part of what is dangerous about the way that we talk about environmental issues today is that there is a lot of focus on the negatives. If we can embrace a messaging which focuses on hope, which focuses on the positive, that is something that will inspire people and invigorate people and give them hope and motivation to be working towards change.
Which is precisely what we try to do at Planet Forward. How do we move the planet forward, right? Terrius?
I would say for any organizations or companies looking to reach out to the younger population, I would say meet them where they are. Don't be afraid to step outside of your traditional marketing methods, and meet them on TikTok, meet them on Instagram, meet them, make it fun and make it enjoyable, and make them want to actually get involved.
Let me just say to you, our 4 Planet Forward FAO fellows, we are so proud of you. We are so pleased to have had an opportunity to work with you. We hope we pushed you and challenged you. We hope you learned from this experience. The stories that you captured, the narratives that you created are valuable in their own right, but they do inform other people. They do inspire other people, and they also can give them ideas. When they read your story or see your story about what's happening in one community, maybe somebody someplace will ask, how do I do that here? Maybe you will inspire some action like that and in other ways. I want to thank FAO again, Akti and Gabe and everybody at FAO. Thank you so much for your inspiration and your support. Lisa, for your efforts throughout the summer, which were tireless and peerless and fearless. So thank you. And to 2 people you, the audience, haven't seen, Kim Asi, who is our Associate Director of Planet Forward, and Victoria Middleton, who is a genius in so many ways, to include with the camera and with some of the technology here. Thanks to you, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. Good luck to all of you. We will promote your stories. Please do the same. And we look forward to seeing you and everybody here again.